Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to start with you, Michelle. Clearly, given the fact that everyone in the world believes wealth does not last 3 generations, why is it that wealth doesn't last 3 generations?
The more attached a person is to growing something, the more likely the thing will grow. The more distant the person is from it, the more likely it'll collapse. Like anything, if you give something, whatever the situation is, tender love and care, usually prospers. Anything you become distant and avoid because you expect it to produce for you, but you're not there, well, eventually what you don't take care of, somebody else will take care of.
How do you go about professionalizing the family office? How do you protect the family office so it can protect the family wealth?
Extraordinarily interesting question, and it's probably a challenge that many of us in this room have had to face. And there's no one size fits all, as we've discussed, absolutely at all. But as Michelle was saying, it's very important that the assets are separated from the business. And I think that the really successful families that have succeeded over generations, of which I think the Kanu family is a most distinguished example, do have some formalized arrangement within the family. You would typically have a family council of some kind, which might have outside directors. And obviously the various family members would negotiate with one another and come to some agreement that could take a long time discussing as to what is going to happen to the assets. But of course, families are growing exponentially, generation by generation, so this is an enormous challenge.
Do you think that over time, actually, the challenges increase rather than diminish?
I think that they do, and it's also something that I can see myself very clearly since I first got in conversation with some of the key families in the mid-80s here, where the old patriarch who was a young man in the 50s and 60s had started the business at the dawn of the oil age, was a totally different personality, obviously, from third-generation members of the family that are often in control. I think that old patriarch had a very simple view. He had made money in his business, and that was what he was focusing on. And then as the second generation came on stream, people realized perhaps that more sophisticated solutions were required. And then it became a question of how you did it, what advisors you were using, and what sort of family aggregate you brought together to run the family office.
Do you find that it's the same pressures, that challenge the business and challenge the professionalization of the family office?
Money is like your body. You are comfortable with a doctor, you're comfortable with a lawyer, you're comfortable with an investment banker or a financial person. You don't want to change them. No matter how much better the other person might be, you don't want to, because there's a certain amount of comfort. And once you reach that comfort zone, it becomes very hard to do this change. But to get to that comfort zone, you're talking about years, if not decades, of interaction till you reach that point of trust.
It's so easy. We hear the word trust all the time. The most important thing is trust. But whose trust do you need to get? Is it the patriarch's trust? Is it the second generation? Is it the third generation?
Well, there's, again, no simple answer, but I think it depends whether the patriarch is still there or not. I mean, if the patriarch is still there, it's not going to matter too much what the second generation or the third generation say, because it's a one-man show. But the problem is, of course, when the older patriarch who founded the business moves on, that within the next 10 years in this region, $1 trillion are going to move to a next generation. I mean, that is an enormous challenge. And if the old chap who had all the prestige of having founded the business and built this multi-billion empire is no longer there, there are major issues to be addressed.
How important is the sense that the best way to protect the wealth is to get it out of the region?
I'm the last person you should be asking that one, because I'm talking about bringing money into this part of the world, not taking it out. I strongly believe, if money under your control, with all the inherited risk that we talked about, it still has a better chance of growing and increasing because you have direct control over it. You take it outside, you are then in the hands of the rules and regulations of the other country and how they change, and it's not going to produce for you as much as it could if it was under your control.
Just a quick add-on. I mean, there have never been exchange controls in this part of the world. Yes. One of the main issues is compliance outside this part of the world.
Very interesting.
That is causing many, many questions and a hugely more elaborate dialogue than used to be the case 15, 20 years ago.
Do you find that there is agreement among the generations about what the right investment strategies are for family offices? And what do you tell your family office clients when they say, what are the strategies we should be investing in today?
Well, there can be areas certainly of agreement where the family may have developed a specialty or an affinity to a specific asset class. In some cases have even developed an edge or a particular capability in managing a certain asset class. For example, we work with a family who's invested heavily into real estate and has learned that while the original source of wealth of the family was not real estate, it's been a natural addition to their existing portfolio, that they have a lot of industrial clients that they're able to introduce into their real estate portfolio and work with, and that they've developed an edge in real estate management, to the point that they've even gone to work with us to have move a lot of their real estate assets into a fund, which is set up in the DIFC as a REIT and will eventually list on the exchange. In that sense, there was a generational understanding and knowledge transfer from the first generation that accumulated the wealth in a lot of this real estate portfolio to the second generation who's now managing it, and has demonstrated efficacy in doing so.
Nabil, I'm going to turn to you now. The reason you were last is because you're all about execution and structuring to make sure that you have the optimal outcomes.
Now, a couple of comments that were made earlier, I'll echo, Michelle's most important comment we said earlier, the need to protect wealth, and going to David's point about the importance of family constitution, governance, and how that happens. Now, what's been happening in reality is that many of the wealth managers who have been coming to the region seem to be ignoring the fact that most of the wealth of these families is here in the region. As Michelle said, hey, he would prefer to double down and buy at a time when real estate prices are low. Other families are saying the same thing. Other groups are coming in and saying, let me help you create a Cayman structure to own your asset. The problem is, I put, pick on Michelle, his family up in the Cayman Islands, and then say, own this piece of property in Jumeirah. Now they can't. Now he's going to be deemed a foreigner, because now he owns a Cayman fund that wants to own a piece of land in the Jumeirah area, or to own listed stocks in Saudi Arabia, et cetera, et cetera. And so a couple of things need to happen. One is to say, well, most people sort of raise their hands up and said, I give up, there's nothing I can really do. What they haven't realized is that the region has been evolving. Some of those evolutions were probably discussed in the earlier segment on Saudi Arabian CMA funds. Saudi families able to structure through a fund structure where they can have Class A units, Class B units of a fund to own land in Mecca, Medina, to own the Toyota dealership to be owned by the particular Saudi family that owns it, but have it in a manner that mimics a Western-style structure while being deemed 100% Saudi. In the GCC, we're seeing an increasing use of, right here, the DIFC, and in Abu Dhabi, the Abu Dhabi Global Market, which are both under English law. And that's the main point. You can have the best of both worlds. You can build a robust English law structure through a regional fund structure, or through a DIFC or ADGM trust or foundation which uses English law and have the benefit of being able to own onshore assets and be still deemed GCC. And the big benefit for a lot of the Gulf families, you may know, is that depending on which country, they pay a lot less taxes if they're deemed GCC. If you're a foreigner in Saudi, you pay a 20% tax on profits. If you're a GCC, you pay zakat, 2.5%. So you really want a regional structure, but under proper governance.
If there are any questions from all of you, forgive me for monopolizing the microphone. Thank you so much.